So, in the last, I guess, really the last few minutes, things have escalated once again regarding the Hong Kong issue. And that is because the Chinese ambassador to Britain, Liu Xiaoming, made an angry speech in which he denounced the interference of the United Kingdom, or what he regards as interference in China's internal affairs. And he's echoing the line that Beijing has been taking on this for the last few days. This is the cover of the Eye a few days ago. China warns UK to stay out of Hong Kong. So now Liu Xiaoming has been summoned to explain his inaccurate comments. I say that's good. It's a good move. It's long overdue. Frankly, I am tired of China thinking they can push the UK around on issues like this. And there's a few important things to point out. Well, firstly, I'll read out Jeremy Hunt's response to the Chinese government on this, and I'm encouraged by this. It's firm but polite. Message to Chinese government, he tweeted. Good relations between countries are based on mutual respect and honouring the legally binding agreements between them. That is the best way to preserve the great relationship between the UK and China. Here's the point. China has made it clear that they are not honouring the principles of the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984. That's that approach of the one country, two systems is set to expire in 2047, but China is making it very clear that they're trying to gradually but surely erode civic liberties in Hong Kong. They want to make it just another communist city akin to Shenzhen or Guangzhou or Wuhan or any other mainland city. And the people of Hong Kong have made it very clear that the vast majority of them do not want to live under a communist system. That is the bottom line. Now, obviously, this has all happened in the context of the dramatic scenes that happened the other day when a hardcore group of protesters burst into the legislative building and vandalized it. We can't gloss that over. That's what they done. Um, they put crude slogans on the walls. They vandalized furniture. They spray painted the Hong Kong logo and put up the old British colonial flag. Um, Now, Theresa May said that she is against violence on all sides. She was very clear about that in Prime Minister's questions today. Beijing has failed to produce any evidence for their claim that Britain, as a matter of policy, is, for example, encouraging unrest in Hong Kong or anything like that. But China has utterly failed to understand what is going on here. China, like all totalitarian states, has the attitude brute force alone will be the answer to this. They have 100% backed Carrie Lam. Carrie Lam has shown an incredible lack of judgment by initially calling peaceful protests riots. What happened the other day, I don't justify it. My personal feeling is it can polarize the pro-democracy movement in itself. I I know they are saying that was a last resort. I I think it could polarize people who would be sympathetic, but it's a bit hypocritical of Carrie Lam to condemn the aggressive tactics those protesters used, whilst she said nothing about the blatant police brutality, the use of tear gas, the use of rubber bullets on peaceful protesters. And this is something that must be emphasized. The vast majority of people who have been protesting against the Lam administration and against Beijing's influence in Hong Kong have been peaceful. 2 million people took to the streets last month. To put that in context, Hong Kong has a population of 7.5 million. Almost a third of the entire territory were on the streets vocalizing their opposition to Beijing's agenda. That would be literally like 22 million people in the United Kingdom protesting, or 100 million Americans. So there is an overwhelming consensus against Beijing. Sure, there will be some pro-Beijing people. There are pro-Beijing lawmakers. Um, What concerns me about Hong Kong, so let me just say, before I get into that, I believe that China is entirely responsible for the escalation of the situation in Hong Kong. If they would respect the autonomy of Hong Kong, if they would respect the Sino-British Agreement, they've gradually shown that they have no respect for that. And this isn't just about the extradition bill. The fact they've kidnapped booksellers shows they don't give a damn about due process. Do you think those booksellers are going to get fair trial in the mainland? Anyone who wants to defend Beijing's behavior? So I think it is right that we have summoned the ambassador. It's about time, frankly. I mean, it isn't just the issues in Hong Kong. I think there's plenty of other ground for taking issue with Beijing's arrogant behavior. For example, they talk about interference in Hong Kong, not producing any evidence that the British government is actually stoking up unrest. The British government has stated its support for the right to protest. That is not the same as interfering. It's not the same as, for example, stoking up disorder and saying, oh, we support unrest. In fact, they've said the opposite. Theresa May was very clear about that. But we are actually duty bound to defend the people of Hong Kong as joint signatories of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. What Beijing seems to think, as all totalitarian dictatorships do, is that sheer brute force alone is the way to go forward. They seem to think that simply by coercing the people of Hong Kong, by trying to introduce communism by stealth through education reforms and so on, that they will get their will in Hong Kong. Um, but what they will find is this will not be put down as easily as the demonstrations in the mainland were in 1989. Um, this is a very volatile situation because it may well be. I mean, this is the biggest crisis facing Xi Jinping since he came to power. The biggest domestic situation. Hong Kong at the moment, if not morally, it's de facto part of China. So this is the biggest crisis facing Xi Jinping. I have no doubt that Beijing is absolutely furious about what's going on in Hong Kong. And, that's now bubbling over the edge, and they are now blaming Britain for this. But it is their fault. They are the party that has tried to force their will on the people of Hong Kong against their will. Carrie Lam was handpicked by the CCP. Colonial era Hong Kong may not have been perfect. It certainly wasn't a perfect democracy, but it is very obvious that by the fact that Hong Kongers have been waving the old colonial flag that they do not want, they remember that as a better time. They do not want to live under this system. And they see it now as a situation that a mere 22 years from now, 28 years from now, um, is that right? 2047 to 2019. Yeah, 28 years from now, they will be completely consumed by mainland China. They will just become another communist enclave, another communist carbon copy. And I totally understand their concern. So yes, those scenes the other day were dramatic and unfortunate. I didn't take any pleasure from seeing that. And I can understand people in Hong Kong feeling that that's polarizing. There may be other pro democracy activists who don't agree with those tactics. It was even speculated, and I frankly wouldn't put this past the CCP, that the people committing that vandalism may even have been agent provocateurs designed to discredit the democracy movement by saying, oh, look how violent they are, and using that as a pretext to abuse power and to basically try and shackle the people of Hong Kong. It would not surprise me if the Communist Party has tried something like that. I'm not saying that's a fact, I can't prove it, but it wouldn't surprise me. Um, because those people that went into the assembly building were a minority of the protesters. And what Beijing wants to do is try and imply that everyone who opposes Beijing's rule are just rioters and anarchists and hooligans. It's not the case at all. How this is going to play out in terms of Sino-British relations, I don't know. Like I say, I think this is long overdue. The ambassador being summoned. because Chinese embassies for years have been interfering in local affairs. Why? Because they've been stoking up the Chinese diaspora, going right back to the Beijing Olympics and probably beyond. This is the behavior of the Chinese embassy. They make subtle threats. They demand respect. And there's this kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing with the Chinese approach because, on one hand, they boast about Sino British relations, the golden era, and they're not as blunt usually as, for example, the Putin regime is. They're a little bit more tactical than that. But I think their interference needs to be challenged in, for example, the way that they stoke up animosity and, in some cases, even attacks against Chinese dissidents living in the West. We need to make it very clear to the Chinese embassy that they have diplomatic rights as an embassy, but they have no rights to stoke up the Chinese diaspora. For example, when you see Chinese students coming out and whining about biased Western media, who do you think encourages that? It's the Chinese embassy. They print Chinese articles that are favoring the Communist Party, that are promoting Communist Party propaganda. They use such initiatives as the Confucius Institutes in our universities to that has nothing to do with culture. I really don't believe that. I think it's all about promoting the official Communist Party line and the thoughts of Chairman Xi. They may have iron control within China. We need to be absolutely clear that that cannot be allowed outside China. This sort of attempts to intimidate dissidents or stoke up the diaspora. And I say to Chinese nationals, as long as you're in the West, you should damn well respect the West. Communism is not welcome here. Westerners who are in China, whether as tourists or working or whatever the situation may be, they have no freedom to dissent. When I was in China, I couldn't exactly be open about my thoughts on the Communist Party. And I had a lot of contentions with the bias of CGTN. So I think it's right that we're taking a hard line. Um, and I think we could do more. I think Ofcom should strip CGTN of its license in the UK. This is a network that has aired forced confessions. And frankly, I think it's got to the point where I certainly don't think we should just block all Chinese nationals from coming to the UK. But we need to remind them that there are guests in this country and they cannot go around demanding respect and talking about hurt feelings. This is a pathetic way that the Communist Party tries to deflect legitimate criticism. You're hurting the feelings of the Chinese people. What about hurting the feelings of the British people or the French people or the people of New Zealand or Australia or America or Canada or any number of other countries, of the Philippines, um, every time that China throws its weight around? We need to stand up to China. It's a powerful country and it's throwing its weight around. Um, I don't think we could do it alone, but Britain is not a weak country. We may not be on par with China in terms of economics and military size, but we're not a pushover. And the dragon needs to understand that the lion can also roar. So I think that it is absolutely right that we've summoned the ambassador. We need to start getting tough with the Chinese. They're talking about, Beijing's talking about hurt feelings. We need to demand apologies occasionally. China loves to demand apologies. We need to demand apologies. For example, and I hope this is brought up in this inevitable meeting tonight with the ambassador, um, why is it you are violating the Sino-British Joint Declaration? Why are you not respecting the autonomy of Hong Kong? These are questions that need to be raised. And as for these 50-cent brigade people who, fly around the flag and think that they can come to Western countries and promote a nasty totalitarian regime, I say to them, you may technically have the freedom to do that, but if you come to a Western country to promote the Chinese Communist Party, don't expect people to take that in a positive way. That's disrespectful to the host nation. It's not like I went to China and waved around the British flag and saying, "Oh, Hong Kong was better under the British." I never done that because that would have been disrespectful to the host nation. You know, um, so For once, we need to be putting the pressure on the Chinese. I hope, I was going to say I hope this doesn't escalate, but unfortunately, I think it's inevitable at this point. Whether we're going to see the sort of tit for tat expulsions as happened with Russia last year, I don't know. But frankly, if it goes down that path, the blame is entirely on China for not respecting the joint legally binding agreement. Britain isn't trying to reclaim Hong Kong. We're not trying to get Hong Kong back. We can't. We've too much on our plate with Brexit. So the claim that we're interfering as a matter of policy ignores the fact that what we're actually doing is simply standing up for the protesters' right to dissent. That's not the same as interfering. It's not the same as a policy matter, for example, saying, oh, you trash the assembly building. No British minister has defended what happened the other day. So the onus is on China to prove their claim that we're interfering in that sense. So, summed up, I support the people of Hong Kong 100%. I support Jeremy Hunt's position 100%. I hope Boris Johnson also takes a tough position on this. And I'm pleased that for once we are summoning the Chinese ambassador. I think it's long overdue. And I think in this meeting, it shouldn't be, although Hong Kong is the major issue, other issues should be brought up as well. For example, behavior of the Chinese embassy in trying to coerce, for example, there is indication that people who have been active on human rights issues in China, on liberties in Hong Kong, have been deselected. And there is indication that the Chinese embassy has had an influence in that. For example, deselected from their local parties after a phone call from the Chinese embassy. Similar things have happened in Australia and New Zealand. We need to get very, very assertive on Beijing's game here. Put simply, I don't think the Communist Party can be trusted. They'll talk about the golden era and they'll talk about mutually beneficial trade and so on. I think we should absolutely block the Huawei deal. Huawei has to answer to the Chinese Communist Party. And a final point, Ambassador Liu says that Britain's stance on Hong Kong undermines Sino-British relations and the principles of those relations. It is China that is undermining these relations with their authoritarian approach to Hong Kong and the fact that they're not going to respect the autonomy of the people of Hong Kong. The reason there is so much anger in Hong Kong isn't because of Britain's position, it's because the Hong Kong people themselves do not want to live under communism.